All right, good afternoon, everyone. It appears that we have everyone here, so let's call the meeting to order. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Belkowski,
Present.
Epic, Martin,
Here.
McNamee, Conley,
Here.
Sheets, Spence, here, Swanson,
Here.
Zibble.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. If we could please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Zibble, if you could please read the mission statement.
Certainly. Laketran is committed to providing quality public transportation services to all Lake County residents, with special emphasis on meeting the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities.
Thank you very much. We will now open up the meeting for public comments, and I see we do have one person listed, John Murphy.
Hi, my name is John Murphy. I'm the chairman of our union here at Laketran. And we all read the paper, I think it was a week or so ago, about the $14.7 million that Laketran is going to be getting to help with the headquarters expansion. And I've been getting a lot of questions from the employees on, you know, what's the course of action we're going to do. I know there's some things in the process, high-speed doors, expansion of the driver's area. But I wonder if this, we're all wondering if this 14.7 is going to speed things along, or if, you know, what the plan of action is.
Don't have an answer for you right now at this moment, but that is going to be the first item that we will be discussing today. And this is the first chance we've had to meet as a group since the grant award.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other public comments that weren't listed in the room today? Seeing none. The first item is there a motion to approve the Laketran Board of Trustees board meeting minutes of February 28th, 2022?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Nunnally. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Sheets. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Spence,
Abstain.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And at this time, we will turn the meeting over for a discussion of the headquarters grant and project. And I would like to turn the meeting over to our CEO, Ben.
Good evening, everybody. Hopefully you had a good week last week, and this could be a great start to next week. So Brian asked me to kind of give everybody an overview about the grant, just some kind of background information. The board doesn't often, talk about individual grants, and so I wanted to give you just a brief overview on the grant process, because there are kind of two processes we use under the federal grant sort of world. So first off, Congress decides how much money is spent. In the infrastructure bill, Congress line items out every program within the Federal Transit Administration's budget. So they have a formula section, they have a competitive bus and bus facilities section, kind of going on down the list, and they stipulate how much money will be spent. And then once Congress has line itemed those individual things out, they send it to the DOT, who sends it to the FTA, and then the FTA can disperse it a couple different ways. I used different color arrows on here intentionally, so those are kind of like one-way streets. So once Congress says this is how much money we're going to spend, that amount of money is spent, period. Whether it's by someone or someone else. They say we're going to spend, $1 billion. That's how much money gets spent. As it moves down into different projects, it is sort of locked from moving backwards. So once it gets to the DOT, it doesn't move back to Congress. Once it gets to the Federal Transit Administration, it doesn't get back to the DOT as a whole. Within the Federal Transit Administration, there are two sort of major grant paths that we are involved in. Formula funds, which is exactly what it sounds like. There is a formula at the federal level by region, and the FTA simply executes based on that formula. That formula says a region will get X amount of money. So the Cleveland region includes us, RTA, it also includes Geauga and Lorraine and Medina. So that region is allocated a certain amount of money. And then there is a competitive pot of money, which is where there's, however much money there is, the FTA has the authority to distribute it to the agencies that they see fit. So essentially at FTA, those two pots of money are segregated and money doesn't go backwards from them. So the competitive grant section, the amount spent on competitive projects, again, is actually outlined by Congress. There is a line item in the infrastructure bill that says how much money will get spent on 5339B projects, which is the project the headquarters falls under. So there's an amount that is to be spent. FTA then distributes it. Same is true with federal funds. So where there can be some flexibility in those things is, so in formula funds, the region has some say in how those funds get split up. There is another formula within the region that dictates who gets how much money. It's a formula that has to be approved by the feds, but it says, RTA gets X number of dollars, Laketran gets X number of dollars, and so forth. I used a green back and forth arrow in that way because every year through NOACA, there is some discussion had about a specific pot of money where Geauga and Medina and Lorraine can't use a portion of their federal dollars. And so they are then split up by agreement by the 5 transit systems in the region. So we get together at the Transit Council in NOACA and agree how those dollars are split. So there is some, kind of compromise and agreements that take place on the regional side, on the formula funds. On the competitive funds, FTA puts out a grant program, everyone applies for it, and they come back and tell us if we did or didn't win. They don't tell us what those criteria are in advance. They have some kind of boilerplate things they like to see, but they don't give us like a scoring rubric ahead of time so we know what they're based on. There is, in my opinion, probably some political, negotiating that takes place behind the scenes. We're never a party to that. We simply submit a request for money and it comes back. Sometimes it gets approved, sometimes it doesn't, and we don't get feedback on why. So it's a little bit of a complicated process, but I thought it was important to understand there are a lot of different steps and different agencies involved by the time the money gets to us. Does that make sense so far? Maybe not from a political aspect, but from a technical perspective. This specific grant is called 5339B, Bus and Bus Facilities. There is also a 5339A. 5339A is the formula amount. So we receive a formula amount of this grant every year. It's usually $300,000 to $400,000, and it is intended to keep buses and bus facilities in appropriate working order. The competitive part is a separate piece that is, again, the amount is set by Congress, and it is a nationally competitive program. So we submit a grant application and compete with the rest of the country for projects. The funds are limited to bus purchases and expenditures related to facilities that support buses. So the bus part is pretty clear, cut and dry. You could buy buses with it. Facilities that support buses is generally bus garages and more back-end bus support stuff. There are some transit centers that get built sometimes, but in general, this money is designed to help facilities that directly support buses, so maintenance facilities, et cetera. Like all FTA grants, these are a reimbursement basis. So FTA doesn't just hand us $14 million. We spend the money first, prove to them we spent it, and they reimburse us. That's not unusual for this grant. That's how all FTA grants work. This particular grant that we're talking about tonight was awarded specifically for the renovation of the current HQ building. So we submitted the application on November 15th of 2021. Andrea included in her compliance and development report in the November board packet. This was the third time we had applied for funds in this project. Both of our previous applications were not funded. This application was for the full 80% of the project cost. Historically, awards from competitive applications are only for a fraction of the project cost. And that's really important because this is highly unusual for us and even the industry. When we complete these grant applications, they actually require us to write a narrative as to what we do with less money. There is sort of a second tier of less money and a third tier. So we have to lay out in the application what would happen if we got less money. That is because it is highly unusual for a grant to be funded at the full amount. The best example of this is, we applied for 17 electric buses in the low no grant application. We got 2. So it's really normal to get a fraction of what you're asking for. If you had asked me to put money on this when we applied for it, I would have said we would have gotten no more than $5 million because that is the norm. If you look at the press release, you can see all those other transit systems that were mentioned got a lot less money than us. And I am sure that that is a fraction of what they asked for. So this is a little unusual. I don't have a reason why we got the full amount, but it is what it is. I can tell you that the shock on all of our faces was pretty unanimous when we heard that this was how the project was funded. So I'm sure many of you are asking, why did we apply for it? So the board had paused the project, but university agreed that something needed to be done. So when we applied for it, the committee still hadn't met yet. We didn't have a ton of direction yet as to where the board was going to go. But again, none of us would have ever expected to win the full project amount. That is very unusual. Based on all of our previous grant awards, we've never won the full project amount before. And I don't know of any of my peers in Ohio that have won the full project amount before. So, it seemed like a very good idea at the time. I still think it was a good idea. I'm still surprised to this day that we won the full amount. Questions about timelines. There are several steps that have to take place still on the federal end for approval. There's kind of 2 applications at the federal level. There's the one application where you submit why you think you should be awarded the money, which is what we did. The second one is the technical application that essentially approves that you have met all the requirements of the grant and that everything that you said you would do can be done. So that part has not been done yet. That's what we call obligating the money. Once the funds are obligated, there isn't a good publicly defined answer as to how long do you have to spend the money once you obligate the money. The FTA doesn't have a guideline for that. Generally, they start bugging us if it's been more than 5 years since the funds were obligated if they haven't been spent. So their objective is to expend the funds, and they will give you all kinds of timeline extensions to get it done. We don't really have any of those. We are pretty good at managing our grants and spending them appropriately. Some of our peers sometimes can get, up to 9-10 years into the rears before they spend the funds. So I didn't have an exact deadline to give you. I wish I did. A couple other things to consider as a part of this project and this grant award specifically. The required environmental work has already been completed. That was one of the things that we hired Bowen to do as part of this project. The National Environmental Protection Act process, or NEPA, typically takes 12 to 18 months. And the FTA has already approved the NEPA for this project. Why that is important is because that can restrict the footprint of anything we build. So the plans that have been created, if the board wanted to move forward, really the exterior footprint of the building could not get larger. I would imagine they would be fine with it if it got smaller, but there is a lot of environmental work done to make sure that we are not disturbing wetlands and all kinds of things. So I don't sense that the board wishes the project to get larger, but it would be almost impossible to do that if the board wanted to, because we wouldn't have enough time to get the environmental work done before the grant funds needed to be obligated. So that's just kind of something to think about. I'm not sure it's a huge deal, but it's important for the board to understand that, or at least have a high level concept of that. The other important thing to remember is Bowen was about 2 weeks from being finished with construction drawings when the project was paused, meaning the project design was 98% complete. So I put that in there because that was part of the narrative in the grant application. So all of that is meant to just kind of give you a high level overview of the grant process of this grant. The grant making process is kind of complicated. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And, you know, this is certainly one of those things that is not always easy to understand. So don't feel confused if you're not like getting all of it yet, because it takes years of being in the industry to get all of it.
Okay, so having reviewed some of it, it seems that if the board were to go forward with a project and utilize all available grant funds, which is $14,681,981, based on the application, the board would be committing to a total project cost of $18,658,075, or at least that, because you could always spend more local money. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then just because it was one of the questions that was a reoccurring question I was asked was, what is the flexibility of the grant dollars specifically into, does it have to be used for the project that specifically was applied for, meaning the project the board tabled in August, or could it be a different project or projects?
Yeah, it could be. There's still plenty of flexibility for the actual look and feel of the project. The FTA doesn't get into the details. We don't send them plans or anything like that. The most important thing to think about in that regard is the footprint of the building not exceeding the previously done environmental work. Beyond that, the project can be changed or adjusted in a whole number of different ways.
Okay. Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for questions or comments. Was there any direction you were looking for today from the board?
Well, we will have to, I don't need direction today. We will have to, at some point, decide how we want to react, whether it be to move forward with the project as it has been designed, make adjustments to that design, not do the project at all. So I don't necessarily need something today, but I think that the 12-month timeline to do the obligation has fundamentally been started. So it will be important to come to some conclusion swiftly.
Okay. I'll do one last chance. Did anyone have a comment or a question they'd like to ask of Ben?
I do.
Yes, Gary.
Refresh my memory if you would, Ben. So this is 14.7 million. What was our COVID receipts total?
We received about $22 million in COVID relief funds.
Okay, and that's sitting on hold right now, correct?
Yeah, so what we did with those funds is we allocated them towards operations. We spent the federal dollars on operations. And while we were spending those dollars on operations, we were putting the sales tax money in the bank account. So fundamentally, those grant funds have almost fully been expended. We have sort of turned them into cash, which doesn't have any strings from the federal government.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Donna?
I just wanted to comment. I think the allocation of the federal funds to operating dollars was a very good move on this organization's behalf because of the challenges we have historically in funding our operations at certain times. That created a nice cushion to be able to deal particularly with our dial-a-ride, which is, from what I'm looking at, is just about back to normal. So I don't think we would want to spend those dollars on a capital project when we have another stream for that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Bill.
Yeah, just a comment. Just curious, what would next steps be? I know we don't need to have them in place, today, but, I think we need to have a plan in place so that we can, put a process, into how we decide how and when we want to spend this money and the type of project we want to put it into.
I think there are multiple paths forward. The path that Ben, I think, I'm not trying to speak for you, outlined here is Bowen's 2 weeks away from being able to take the past project out to bid. So that's certainly one option. Authorize, would it be a discussion with Bowen of remaining fees that they would be due and take the current project out to bid? Is that option one?
I think that would be a good option one. If the board remembers, before the project was paused, Bowen had come to us and asked for additional dollars. So it's unlikely that they would restart the project without some additional dollars. I have not had a conversation with them about how much that would be. But their previous request was for $330,000. Again, I have no idea if that's what they would want to restart, if they'd want more or less. I don't really know, but I would be happy to initiate that conversation if the board would like that number.
Aside, what happened with the list from the last?
I reached out to them on the list for the last meeting, and they did give me a price. So I have that. It was about, I'd want to double check it, but it was roughly $240,000 to get halfway through the design process. They didn't tell me it would be how much it would be for the second half.
So $240,000 for the 8 ad hoc projects?
Yes.
Okay. So option one is re-engaging Bowen to finish up the past project. Option two is creating a different project. Option three is doing nothing. Option four would be whatever anybody else would propose here. I know this gets a little bit complicated because at the last meeting, we were talking about tying in strategic planning to what would we do if we were to do a larger project. So this is certainly a little curveball or different than that conversation left off.
So let me just make sure that I understood what you said, Ben. We have essentially 12 months to tell FTA what we want to do with the money. Is that right?
Kind of. We have 12 months to what they call obligate the money, which is when they have accepted our technical application and the funds are essentially reserved for us permanently. They don't go back. So you don't necessarily have to tell them, again, you never really tell FTA specifically, like they don't ever review blueprints or any of that stuff. They look at kind of the high level. So they're going to go through kind of a checklist that says, is the NEPA work done? Yes. Is the historical survey work done? Yes. And so once all of those criteria are met, they'll approve it. So if, say, the board wanted to use the full amount of money, but tweak or make even some major adjustments to what was previously designed, that's fine. If the board wants to do a project smaller and spend less of the money, then we'd have to have some discussions with them, whether they would let us do a smaller expenditure level, or if they would say, hey, if you cut that in half, then it doesn't meet the spirit of the grant, we're going to take it all back, kind of thing. So That's not a conversation we've had with them before, so I'm not as familiar with what they would do if the board said, let's spend half of it. I would imagine we could negotiate with them to do that, but you never know. I don't know if that, I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, I'll try again.
That was pretty gray.
It is relatively gray, honestly. You know, Andrea can maybe answer some technical details about what's required in the grant application. She's the one who submits the technical applications to FTA. So Andrea, is there anything I missed when I said that?
No, I don't think so. We give FTA in the application that obligates the money kind of just a brief overview, and that is what goes into the public record of how the federal government is spending the money. So they have a lot of criteria that need to be met in that application, but it, as Ben said, it is very high level. The very nitty-gritty details were in the application itself. And so, you know, we wouldn't be able to use this money to, you know, purchase buses, but I believe any sort of reconstruction, rehabilitation, renovation, and or expansion would meet the spirit of the grant.
Okay, but coming back, just to hit this one more time with a hammer. We don't necessarily have to have a specific plan in place. We just sort of have to be showing them that we're working towards it. Is that an accurate way to sum it up? What I'm not hearing is we don't have to hand them something that says, yes, you gave us the grant and here's what we're going to do with the money. Instead, what we have to do is say, yes, you gave us the grant, we've accepted the grant, and we're working on a program. Or is that still not correct?
I would say we're going to give them the 50,000 foot view, but they never look below that. So as long as the 50,000 foot view is in line with what the board wants to do, then it's fine, but the details don't get reviewed.
Okay, so if we, and I'm not proposing this, just trying to get a sense of it. If we said, hey, we got this, we didn't expect it exactly, and it tied into us planning to do a strategic plan. We're doing the strategic plan, but that's going to take 14 months. And then what will come out of that is a plan for the building. Where would that leave us?
I think that would be a little too ambiguous for the feds. I think they would want to know you're still gonna build it. So if you said, we're not sure if we're gonna build it as part of the strategic planning process and we couldn't commit to that, then they probably wouldn't accept it. When the funds get obligated, they're gonna want to know and you have to actually certify and assure that you will do the project, period. So, and again, what's defined as the project has flexibility, but a project doesn't. So,
Well, all right, let me refine this. I'm playing lawyer here, so don't throw anything at me. If we said to them, we need the strategic plan to figure out what it is we want to build, but we are going to build. Maybe I'm beating maybe this is going down a rat's nest here, but does that put us in jeopardy of losing the funding?
I don't know the exact answer to that, but I would lean towards yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
And if I may just say one thing, the obligation process is in total. So it is an all or nothing. I cannot obligate partial funds. I can only obligate the total award at a time.
I was not here last meeting, so I apologize if it was discussed. I didn't see it in the minutes. But Brian, you had said that, there was a conversation about kind of doing a strategic plan process to see how a expansion or renovation would fit in. During this conversation, was this grant brought up that this was a possibility that we were going to be rewarded that in that conversation? Because like you said, it kind of throws a curveball into that. And I just didn't know if there was a conversation that, hey, this might be coming if you're talking about doing this project based on a strategic plan, because that definitely hinders that.
So at the last meeting, Gary presented a sort of a mini conclusion to the building committee, saying the building committee was deadlocked, but one thing the committee agreed on was doing some ad hoc projects for things that needed immediate attention. Coming from that was, Gary's also said, I talked to all the board members, and with the board having changed so much over the last couple of years, it seems like getting everyone together and coming up for a strategic vision of where the agency is going to be 2, 5, 10 years would be helpful, because members of the board are struggling with committing such a large amount of capital, not necessarily fully grasping where things are headed over the next few years. Was that accurate, Gary? Sorry, I tried to put myself in your shoes.
Better than I could say.
The first I knew about the grant was last week. I don't believe anyone was aware of that ahead of time.
I didn't know if I missed something that last meeting, then that was the first that I had, and there were conversations around it. I wasn't sure if it was brought up and I just missed it.
Yes, no, last week was the first. Does anyone else have questions, comments? Yes, Donna. Donna, can you please turn on your mic? Thank you.
It bears repeating again that while we are due for another strategic plan, it still remains the tail end of what we did previously with the projection of passing a levy for an additional percentage on the sales tax and being able to expand our service to accommodate the additional dial-a-ride riders and do the other things that we have completed. That this just hasn't been pulled out of the sky.
I would just like to add a little bit more to what Donna there says, is that we have this project that's been laid out for us. It's addressing some of the needs of the facility immediately that needs to be done, worked on. Certainly, the longer you put it off, the longer more it's going to take to bring it back. That's like with the replacement of certain things. There is some overcrowding work or overcrowding in the building already, so there is that need there to maybe be addressed, and to put that off for a longer period of time may not be the best for us to be doing that. Also, everybody's been affected by the cost of inflation, so I do want to remind everybody that if the rate of construction that's going up right now, the cost that we're going to be seeing is going to be increasing quite a bit over the next year if we wait a year to make a decision on this. So we'd be talking about quite a bit of an increase. The grant is a fixed amount, so that's not going to change at all with inflation. And also, we're going to be spending more and more local dollars to do something in the future. So certainly, I think at this point, it'd be prudent for us to go forward with some type of a project to start going down the road to making these improvements.
And the more local dollars we spend, the less we will have to put into our dial-a-ride and other passenger services down the road as those costs rise.
Yeah, the thing that I would add, if I may, Mr. President, that Chuck made me think of is I absolutely think a strategic plan is needed and essential. No dispute there. I do think, though, that, the building is a very flexible work surface, and the building doesn't really restrict what we can do in the future. And even the plans that we made that are close to being done really don't stop us from doing anything. And they really don't say like, hey, if you don't think about this thing in your design process, you won't be able to do it in the future. Fundamentally, our building is designed for transit, and unless the definition of transit changes dramatically, and I I think it's going to change some, but I don't think it's going to be dramatically. Then the building is going to support our operation for a long time. You know, when this building was built 30 years ago, a lot of the things we're doing today weren't envisioned as part of our operation. And so while I don't mean to say that in any way disparaging the idea of a strategic plan, I absolutely think that is essential. I do want to make sure that we're thinking about, you know, the building itself is a sort of a means to an end, and its sort of physical format doesn't have much to do with what we can do. You know, the big limitation is space. If there's not enough space, then that's where we get sort of limited. But, you know, we've adapted over time to be able to do what we need to do to the best of our ability, regardless of how the building is built. So, you know, inevitably in the next 30 years, there's going to be changes that we can't predict today that we'll have to deal with. So again, I don't want it to sound like I don't want to do a strategic plan. I absolutely do, but I'm not sure that we will have a lot of major differences between how the building was designed now versus what we might do differently at the outcome of a strategic plan.
Okay, so this item was just put on the agenda as a discussion for everyone to be able to ask questions, get their thoughts out. And I don't hear any sort of direction of, hey, tell them we don't, tell the FTA we don't want the money, or tell them yes. Gary pointed out the timeline. It seems like we have some time to decide and also to go into a strategic planning session. So I think for right now, we're going to continue it in the discussion phase unless anyone has a different direction they would want to motion to go forward immediately. Either, any direction. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. At this time, the next item on our agenda is an executive session. Is there a motion to enter into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official pursuant to section 121.22 G1 of the Ohio Revised Code?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Spence. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Swanson. And at this time, we will go into executive session. I will invite the board to stay with Mr. Dines. Oh, and we'll do a roll call first. Trudy, if you could please do a roll call. My apologies.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets, Spence,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
All right, my apologies for that, everyone. And we will invite at this time, Lisa, we'll turn the meeting over to you for the financials.
So I cut back on the packet. I still put the detail. I'm not sure if you guys want that in there. I can always put it in the department reports if you wanted, but I tried to summarize it on this first page. So for the total revenues for this year, we're at 3.5 million, right in that actual column. And our expenses are about 1.7 million. So it's only the first month of the year. So looking at this, I would say that we're on target for what we've budgeted so far. Down below, I kind of gave a percentage. I tried to classify the revenues to kind of show, because the last 3 years, we've been getting quite a bit of money from the federal governments. So that's not a normal. And I kind of summarized on my paper here, not so much in there. And I know we've talked about it a million times, but I'll just reiterate it one more time again. The first grant that we got was the CARES grant, and we received all of that. That was about 6.3 million. And we received that in 2020, and we drew it all down for 2020 expenses. Then we received a CRISA grant in the amount of about $4.8 million. And we drew all of that down in 2021. And then we received an American Recovery Act grant, and that was for a total of about 9.7 million. About 3.4 million of that was earned in 2021, and we have a balance of about 6.3 to 6.25 that we will draw down in 2021. And then that should end those grants. So here, federal and state on budget and actual is about 33%. That's not normal. I would venture to say your more normal might be closer to 2021, even though we received the grants in 21. If my memory serves me correctly, I'd have to go back and double check. But I believe we did not start drawing down that, not Chris. I think we knew we were going to get it, but we didn't know what the amount was. And that's why it's not, I don't believe that that was included on the January. And then basically the next slide is just the breaking out the revenues and expenses a little bit more with dollar amounts. But it's basically the same as what was on that first page. So I'm not going to go over all that again, unless you, of course, you have any questions regarding that, because my next slide will be the STS, Special Transportation Services. Okay. So on the Special Transportation Services, I kind of did the same thing, to summarize it. We've received about $2,705 in January. We have operating expenses about $16,000. Our operating expenses, that's higher. It's on target with the budget. It's higher, of course, than actual, and that could just be due to timing. I do know in January of this year, we paid the insurance and we paid the fee for the buses, and that's a fixed cost whether we operate or don't operate. And then down below, I did the same thing with the wages and benefits and services, and that's kind of going to be all over right at this point. But I think the objective or the takeaway is that in 21, we had a lot less, and we're doing more now in 2022. It's still January. That's a little bit low. We were picking up, made a little bit more revenue at the end of last year. I think it just might be the time of the season. So, and then that also has the financials. Yes.
Lisa, what's the services increase? In the detail, it's huge.
Oh, services,
Yeah.
according to the percentage, that's going to be off. That's going to kind of be because of the fixed cost. That services is the payment. We pay it quarterly for the, we have to put the buses, we have to keep them off site. So we rent a facility for that. Yes. It's like, I think we pay it every quarter in advance. So I think it's like 6,000 every quarter. Yeah. And then, and compared to the prior year, it could just be a timing issue. I'm not exactly sure when we paid that, but I do know the insurance was off because of that. I think we paid it in February last year and we paid it January this year. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And then that's just the detail of the expenses. Unless there's any other questions for the Special Transportation Services. Okay. And then we'll go on to the next one. The next one is just the cash balance. I just tried to summarize the operating. We have a formula that we use that was passed by the board a few years back on the amount to keep for operating expenses. That will probably change once we get the CAFR for 2021. I use that expense line item to apply the 5 months to, and that'll probably stay, that should stay pretty consistent around the $8 million mark. The capital piece at 3.4 million, if you look on the capital detail, that is what is committed for 2022 and prior years. And then the other is the cash balance that we have that could be spent on either capital or operating. There's no particular obligation for that at this point. And then STS cash balance is about 596,000, bringing the total cash balance at about 32 million. And that should match on your cash sheet that I give for the detail with all the bank statements and stuff, which is the Schedule C. And then on the last, this is what are on the page 16, your capital projects, the detail. This just kind of summarizes over the years for federal, local, and state share. And I probably should have not put a word down there at the bottom because that would include, that 15 million would also include anything that we spent on Bowen so far to date too, I believe. And that was just a little note, doesn't mean we're doing it. I just pulled it out and put it down there because it was in the capital piece. And then if we break it out by the federal share versus local share versus state share, kind of gives you an idea. And of course, that's from 2022 through 2027. Most of the things in the future years are buses, is basically what those larger amounts are for bus purchases. So unless there's any questions regarding the capital projects piece.
Mr. Sheets, seconded by Ms. Mack.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets, Spence,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
We're here to ask for approval to enter into a contract for electrical services here at headquarters. With all the new construction, there's a lot more electric services with buildings, with service panels, lighting, along with electric bus chargers. With 7 chargers around the county, with the 2 new transit centers now, the expected amount of service meant we had to go into a contract for electrical services. We put out a RFP for proposals because of the electric bus infrastructure, the charging equipment, the chargers, the pantographs and everything. We went for a proposal and we wanted to look at people's qualifications and their capabilities of performing the work. 3 people bid on the job, 3 companies bid on the job. We interviewed all 3 of them and scored them, as you see there. VL Chapman, who did all of our installs in all the facilities and the electric charging here and out at the park and rides or the transit centers, scored the highest for all of us. And they were reasonably priced compared to Enertech. So we're asking for approval from the board to enter into and execute a contract for electrical maintenance with VL Chapman at an average annual cost of $59,000. That's an annual cost because they did enough due diligence because ABB, the charging equipment, they have a schedule of replacement components, and VL Chapman's actually, their curve followed. They put some logical thought into it instead of giving a price and increasing it by a percentage every year. Years 1 and years 4 are higher than years 2 and 3 because that's when equipment's due to be replaced or more extensive PMs on. Can answer any questions.
Well, I have a hard time with comparing almost $60,000 to $40,000 if Zenith is a legal person to do this stuff. I don't, that's over 5 years, that's $300,000 versus $200,000. That's pretty significant. And I don't see anything on here like your other evaluation criteria on some of the other projects that have anything to do with cost. Seems to me cost is pretty important.
Proposals are based on the criteria that we set in the document. A bid is based on price. Zenith has multiple departments from what I remember from their interview, but they're basically car charging, EV charging, not battery electric buses. So there's a difference there. The pantograph, they do have engineering firms. Go ahead.
Well, I guess why is it in here? That is more a better question.
Because why are they on the chart? Is that what you're asking? Because in our RFP, we said we'd interview 3 people. And there's only 3 people that proposed.
Just curious question. Do the bidders or the proposers get any sort of guidance from us in terms of cost expectations? It's just weird that 2 came in so close and then somebody else is so far off.
I don't know if we're not allowed to give cost expectations in a proposal. I don't remember ever providing that for a proposal, what cost expectations were. So these 3 were not. Are we allowed to?
For all procurements, we do have to establish an independent cost estimate. So the independent cost estimate that I was able to establish was for the hourly rates for the maintenance, the labor, the maintenance, for like additional services, but not the actual preventive maintenance activities, because there's no one else in the state that has this equipment that could provide an independent cost estimate for the maintenance of the chargers. So there wouldn't have been any guidance to give the vendor. I think the fact that we have two vendors that are within reasonably close to one another indicates that Zenith probably did not comprehend or read with comprehension what we were asking.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. It's just really curious that the two came in so close. That just, I mean,
I worry when bids are very disparate in that way. It usually, to me, means that they didn't understand what we were asking.
so would you expect that these, because Intertech and DL Chapman came in so close, that they had conversations with the charging manufacturer or something to get some sense of costing?
We know they did.
Yeah.
Okay.
During the interview process, they made that very clear, whereas did not.
Okay, thanks.
Keith, you had mentioned in years 2 and 3, there'll be potentially some savings, because there won't be as much maintenance on the electric charging stations.
Year one with onboarding the electric charger, if they expect the PMs to be higher, so
Okay.
more labor in them. I think it's year 4 that the price is higher per month because the replacement of components.
Do we know how much less that will be in years 2 and 3, for example?
We do. Honor has got a charge in front of her right now, not to keep passing the
Yeah.
buck, but
No, we're a team. So this is why we work on this together. So the monthly rate for the first year of VL Chapman's work is about $5,168. In 23, 24, and 25, it goes down to about $4,600 and $4,700. And then in year 5, it goes back up to $5,400. And that is due to just the numerous preventive activities.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Keith? Seeing none at this time, is there a motion to approve the attached resolution authorizing the CEO or designee to enter into and execute a contract for electrical maintenance with VL Chapman at an average annual cost of $59,172 for preventative maintenance activities?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. McNamee. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Zibble. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yes.
Conley,
Yes.
Sheets, Spence,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Keith. And it looks like I'm turning it back over to you.
this is one of the projects on the construction list from the committee. We're here to ask for a resolution authorizing the CEO or his designee to enter into and execute a contract with Excel Solutions for the installation of 4 high-speed doors at a cost not to exceed $132,120. Okay. So high-speed doors, as we know, we've been looking into those to save some energy, save on some heating costs through the winter months. We estimate at least 400 times a day that the doors open, with buses pulling out up to 200 trips out a day, 200 trips in a day. We went out for a bid on this one, which was based on price. We held a pre-bid meeting here on February 22nd. 3 vendors attended the bid meeting, but only one bid was received from one of the vendors. Excel Solutions was the only responsible bidders. a lot of back and forth surprisingly on this project. Figured a relatively easy project, just a high-speed door. The request for approved equals and the questions that all funneled through, again, Andrea, were kind of surprising to all of us. So when Excel Solutions bid on it, the R value was double what we specified in our bid documents. The opening speed exceeded what was specified. The closing speed, we learned through the process, was a little hard to meet with a rigid door. We think the spec on that was more for either a canvas or a rubber door. Multiple people asked for approved equals to be approved. Our research showed that our expectations were a little high. So we backed it down and approved multiple, or at least 2 vendors, their doors. And this was the faster closing speed. It's in inches per second. This door closes at 24 inches a second. The other one that was going to be proposed was 20 inches a second. And this is a rigid aluminum door. It's weather sealed with no metal to metal contact. So it met all of our specifications. So we're here to ask for approval of the attached resolution authorizing the CEO or his designee to enter into and execute a contract for the installation of 4 high-speed doors, overhead doors, with the Excel Solutions at a cost not to exceed $132,120.
How much maintenance do they need?
There's going to be quite a bit more maintenance. These spiral, they launch up basically and go into a spiral instead of your normal door that goes up a track. I don't know if processors are the right word, but it's computer driven. It's going to be a little more maintenance, but because now they're making them without metal to metal contact, they've improved over the years. I talked to is actually Classic at the Ford. They have their doors maintained. It's kind of a good sign because they know the company's logo, but the guy didn't know the name of the company. So I guess the van's not there all that often. If it's broken down all the time, you're going to remember the name of the company. So
You don't know if it's Excel.
excuse me?
You don't know if it's Excel.
No, they're not Excel. They're Ride Tech, I believe, is what they were at Classic Ford.
Classic has those high-speed doors in all their dealerships.
Oh, okay.
Pretty sure.
Okay. So
They're quick.
yes.
Is there any, sorry, go ahead.
Good.
Is there any kind of warranty that we're getting, or?
We specified the warranty in our bid document. Everything was written as from date of purchase. Our bid document is date of acceptance. It's 5 years on mechanicals. I want to say 3 years on the electric, 2 years on electric, and 3 years on. Right? Yeah, I don't have my cheater.
That's okay. Just as long as they're going to be picking
Yes.
up.
Electrical components from 2 years of acceptance, mechanical components for a period of 5 years from acceptance, the motor assemblies and mechanical components. Boy, you print this small. 2 years on panel assemblies, labor for 5 years from acceptance.
Yes, Chuck.
Keith,
Yes.
if the door fails, how long is the response time to come out to fix them? And what is the backup plan to get the buses out of the garage or in the garage?
The doors can be operated. There's a manual override to raise and lower them with basically a chain-like system where you could draw them up. With a damaged slat, the door could still be operated, I believe, with up to 2 damaged slats. It could still run because there's a rubber membrane in between the slats. So you could pull them out if they're damaged and still operate the door.
Okay, so there is a manual operation on it.
Yes.
So we can still get them in.
Yes.
Because I think what I'm hearing is that the competition didn't work. We only got one bid, and so we're going with that one bidder. But since we don't have more than one bid, how do we know that this bid is accurate or is reasonable? In other words, are the classic doors $32,000? Is that how much they paid? or 260,000, did you do anything to test the reasonableness of this 132,000?
Like Andrea was saying before, we do an independent cost analysis for it. She has information from, I believe, other transit properties. And we looked at this probably 8 years ago. So we had some old data that we weren't ready to take to the board back then. And just from talking to some of, again, Classic Ford on what they've spent, we feel it's reasonable. We have the removal and potentially some duct work and other work that needs to be done too.
Yeah, so that, I'm gonna clarify a little, that term that Keith used, ICE, is independent cost estimate. We're required by the Federal Transit Administration to do one of those for any procurement we go through. So in advance of the procurement being let, Andrea has to research the product and we have to internally have the cost estimate we expect. So that, yes, John, we do that for any procurement, but that also answers Gary's question. Those are public records. So even if we don't always wish to share the cost estimate we have created, if a vendor asks for it, we do have to provide it. So very rarely do they ask for the ICE, but it is a process we go through for all procurements, not just this one.
And how much was it for this?
Our ICE?
The estimate I had from Bowen when they did the analysis for these doors was 114,000.
That was also from, that estimate was was from April of last year, right?
Correct, yes.
Any other questions or comments for Keith? Is there a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the CEO or his designee to enter into and execute contracts with Excel Solutions for the installation of 4 high-speed doors at a cost not to exceed $132,120?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Sheets. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Epic. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets, Spence,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'll turn the meeting over to Ben for the 6-month look ahead.
All right, we have another fantastic and exciting 6-month look ahead. In April, we are still planning a van pool presentation. I will say there's some changes in that. Originally, we had planned on presenting an operating plan and a budget. After a lot of internal discussion and research, this will be more of a presentation on some possible outcomes versus suggesting that we should move forward with an operating plan and a budget. So I think you should think of this as what we have learned through the process and what we may or may not be recommending as a way to move forward. But if you were looking for an actual operating plan and a budget, that's not quite what we're going to have for you. This will be more about like, what type of service makes sense for Lake County? Is it van pool? Is it maybe a variation? We'll also have a very exciting public transit agency safety plan, or the PTASP, which is required to be approved every year, which is just a safety plan required by the feds. We will have an approval request for the replacement of the front pavers and overflow lot sidewalk. This did get, as a reminder, this did get moved up. We originally had it on for June. Bowen said that they could have it done quicker, so it will be ready for the April board meeting. In May, we'll have a presentation of the annual report and the state grant authority, which is another routine item. Oops, I have that on there twice. My apologies. June, we have no items still to date. July, we have federal grant authority, which is another routine item. We'll have approval request for the triennial disadvantaged business enterprise target. This is a goal we've talked about before. I know it's a kind of interesting one that is required by the feds. In September, we have an update to the pay grade tables. I'll reiterate again, this is not a salary action in any way. This is simply the grades that the positions exist within. It does not affect the pay of any employee. It simply is just, when we say pay grade 8, what does that mean? We change that, or we update that about every 5 years. So again, no wage changes at all. We'll have the 2022 audit acceptance, and we'll have the Breckenridge Supplemental Paratransit Agreement. So for those of you that are a little newer, Breckenridge operates buses as part of their facility. We have a deal with them that essentially we don't provide dial-a-ride service to Breckenridge. They provide the dial-a-ride themselves, but they go above and beyond. So we get essentially cheaper dial-a-ride service to Breckenridge, and they get better service internally. So it's kind of a public-private partnership that really benefits both of us. In the last couple of years, they have started bringing their buses here for maintenance, and so they pay us to have the maintenance done in our facility. In October, we have a request for fleet detailing and janitorial services. So right now, we use Deepwood's Community Employment Services to do the janitorial for the headquarters and for fleet detailing. The contract will be expiring, so we will have to go out to bid for another 3-year contract. Does anybody have any questions on any of those things? If you don't mind, Mr. President, I'll roll on through. So this is something that, based on conversations I had with a couple of you, I thought it would be beneficial to look at our cash balance at a very high level. This is, all rounded from Lisa's information. So the details Lisa has, but this is just a high level view of cash. So today we have roughly $32 million in the bank. The board passed a requirement several years back saying we had to have 5 months of operating cash in the bank. So that's the red pie piece. The blue pie piece is the local match we are required on existing federal projects. The green pie piece in both things is, you could give it lots of names. It's essentially unrestricted cash. We can spend it on whatever we want. It's not got federal strings attached to it. It's just cash in the bank. So today we're sitting around $32 million balance. We have 2 more chunks of cash that are going to be drawn down soon. So the expenditures have been made. We will be reimbursed from the feds. So in not too short of a time, a couple months, we'll see our cash balance be about $44-ish million. And obviously this is a little bit of a moving target. So don't stick too tight on the exact numbers, but just general ballpark. This is the type of cash balance we are looking at. All of the green pie pieces are funds that do not have a requirement or rule attached to them. They can be spent on whatever the board chooses to spend on. Do you have a question about the? Sure.
It's been a while since the board voted on the operating reserve. I'm just wondering what the process of the levy and the cost that reserve.
Well, the language for the operating reserve is based on number of months of budget. So it changes based on whatever our budget is. So I don't think there's any need for the board to make an adjustment to that, because if our budget is 40 million, it would be 5 months of that. Or if it was 20 million, it'd be 5 months of that. So what Lisa does is she looks at the previous year's budget and determines what it was for last year, and that's what it is for the next year. Yes. So that number is, Lisa essentially reviews that number and adjusts it every year. Yes, since it's tied to months, it's not tied to an actual number. It's just however many months it takes. Another interesting thing coming up that we'll all get to think about a little bit is, with the passage of the federal infrastructure bill, we are going to be receiving by formula roughly another $1 million a year through the 5307 program. So formula-based just shows up. We really should start thinking about a couple tweaks to our existing service. I don't think it should be anything major, but we do have some existing needs that we consistently hear about and that we have some data to support. So that money will show up at the end of this year. It shows up in federal fiscal 23, which starts in October. So we are going to start having some presentations as we go about some little adjustments to service that we are going to recommend for the 2023 budget and year. Primarily, one of the most important ones is just to do some tweaks in our hours. So right now we operate 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. except for a weird hour between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. when we kind of do dial-a-ride, but we kind of don't. It's really a relatively poor way to operate. It's first come, first serve, but there's a lot of demand for it, so it's always filled up pretty quickly. We also consistently hear from employees using fixed route that they need to be at work at 6, and the bus doesn't start running until 6. We have some data to support that we'll be presenting to you in the future to make some of these tweaks. So we're not really preparing any major changes, but there are some changes that will improve service for the community in both dial-a-ride and fixed route. Right now, we have no plans or thoughts on changing anything with park and ride.
And
sure.
$1 million you referred to, is that an annual thing for how many years, or is it?
It is annual for at least 5 years, but usually infrastructure bills go beyond their actual number of years because there's a continuing resolution passed when Congress gets deadlocked on a future. So
correct.
It's for at least the 5 years of the infrastructure bill,
Okay.
and then whatever time after that it may or may not be continued.
So if they do pass a new one in 5 years, that could change though. So, but you got pretty much guaranteed 5 years that you're going to get the extra.
Yes,
funding.
we are 100% guaranteed the extra funds from federal 23 all the way to federal 28.
Gotcha. Okay.
So after that,
Yeah.
I don't know. Ridership, I have some good news here. Even though we had pretty poor weather in January, ridership recovery has increased quite a bit in the first 2 months of 22. So obviously ridership is always changing, but we have seen bigger increases in ridership in January and February of this year than we did for the average of 21. So I did take out the first week of the year because comparing the week of New Year's and Christmas and stuff to the other weeks doesn't really make sense because the ridership is always lower. But in general, we've seen a 5% increase in dial-a-ride, 8% on fixed route, and 11% on park and ride, which is pretty good news. Some of the most important things from a high level to understand here is dial-a-ride expenses vary with ridership. So the more people ride dial-a-ride, the more service we have to put on the street, the more money it costs because every trip costs money. On local route and fixed route, or on local route and commuter express, we run the same number of buses, whether there's one person on them or 20. So seeing ridership go up on local routes and park and ride is really great because there's no additional operating expense for that. That's just more people on the bus, more efficient transportation because you got more people on it, all good. Dial-a-ride, it's nice to see ridership come back, but it's always important to be thinking about, dial-a-ride, every trip requires a bunch more resources. So this is all positive. We are very close to being at 2019 levels on dial-a-ride, which 2019 is that was our high water mark. So that's when we kind of reached the end of our capacity. So it's important for us to watch, ridership is hard to predict, but it's very possible that this year we will get to our 2019 numbers or eclipse it a little bit. People's commute patterns have changed, but it's interesting to listen to ODOT talk. Automobile traffic has not gone down now in the pandemic. The time of day that you see peaks have changed. So instead of having your traditional AM and PM peak, now the peak that ODOT can show in all their charts is lunchtime. So people have changed what they do, but they haven't changed how much they do it. And so that's an important way to think about ridership is they've changed what they're doing, but not how much they do it. If that makes any sense. So that's kind of a weird thing to say, but I think we should expect to see ridership, at least on dial-a-ride, sort of back to normal this year. Local routes, I think probably will be close to back to normal. And park and ride, even though 11% up is great, this is still 60% down. So an 11% increase is great, but park and ride is still struggling to be where it was. So I'm quite surprised that the increase is as big as it is. When you see gas prices at $4 a gallon, we've always said internally $4 a gallon is the number when people ride the bus. And so it's likely that the gas prices have some impact on the park and ride ridership and potentially local routes. So we'll keep filling you in with this. Again, all the details to this are in Matt's director's report, which are all still available on Govenda if you want to look at the details. Last two quick things. Oops, sorry. Yeah.
Just a quick question about dial-a-ride. You say we're almost back
We're right around 10% down. Geauga Transit Study, RLS, the ODOT consultant has started interviews. They will be reaching out to the board to conduct some interviews about your opinions about Geauga and just kind of things in general. So I'll send you out an email when that takes place, but they have sent letters to the Geauga County Commissioners to start talking to Geauga. So expect some more information to come. All of those initial conversations are scheduled early April. So they have not given us a schedule as to when they'll be reaching out to everybody else, but you should expect to hear from them somewhat soon. Lastly, I had a second meeting with Lake Erie College about their request for service. We've narrowed down some of the options they would like. They really want a dedicated shuttle to their campus. I've been talking to them about the cost of that. It is kind of expensive. I'm not sure they're going to be able to afford it. But we also talked about some changes to Route 5. Route 5 services Fairport and Painesville in two pieces. The northern half, it services Fairport, which performs well. The southern half services Painesville, doesn't perform as well as we would like it to. So this is an opportunity where we think we can make a benefit to the route and service Lake Erie College by just changing a route alignment, which doesn't cost anything. We would need to get their permission to run on their campus and some other things, but hopefully this will end up with a relatively positive outcome for both of us. Obviously, to do that, I would bring it back to the board for official kind of approval if we get to that point. Their timeline is to have the service up and running by late 2023 when they open their new building in Painesville. Most important thing here is that we would have to buy some additional buses to do this. We could operate it short term with our current fleet, but long term, we probably would need one or two extra buses. They really love the idea of one that looks like a trolley. My staff will tell you jokingly that I hate the T word is a dirty word for me because it just means extra maintenance, but they love the idea of kind of that old charming type of thing. So we'll see what happens when we get there, but yeah. And then I wanted to give an opportunity. This is the first format where the director's reports are not in the packet. They are all in Govenda in dedicated folders, so you have access to those to look at. And if you had any questions on them, I'd be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, that is the end of my talking. I don't know. I put this in here. I don't know if Gary had any updates.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. I don't believe we have any updates from the Special Projects Committee at this time. Is there any old business in the room? Any new business? At this time, is there a motion to adjourn today's Board of Trustees meeting?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Spence, seconded by Ms. McNamee. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets, Spence,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are adjourned at 6:17 PM.